The red warning lights flashed across the control room walls as Commander Jake Murphy stared at the screens showing enemy ships above Kepler Colony. 3 weeks had passed since the alien warships first appeared in their sky. 3 weeks of fear and waiting. 3 weeks of hoping someone would come to help them. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at the tactical display again. 30 alien vessels hung in space above the mining colony like hungry wolves waiting to strike. The ships were sleek and silver, with weapons that could turn the entire settlement into dust in minutes. The Zephyrian Empire had sent these ships with one simple message: give us your mineral deposits or die. The colony had been built on the edge of human space to mine rare crystals that powered faster than light travel. 50,000 people called this place home. Miners and their families, engineers and doctors, teachers and shopkeepers, regular people who had never expected to face an alien invasion. The colony's small defense force had tried to fight back during the first attack. 20 ships against 30. It had been a massacre. Jake turned away from the screens and walked to the communication station where Lisa Campbell was still sending distress signals. Her voice had become hoarse from hours of broadcasting their location and situation to anyone who might listen. She looked up at him with tired eyes. Any response from Earth Command? Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. Lisa shook her head. Nothing. The nearest military base is 12 parsecs away. Even if they sent ships right now, they wouldn't arrive for weeks. She paused and looked at her instruments. The aliens are giving us 6 more hours. After that, they begin bombing civilian areas. Jake nodded and walked to the window that faced the main settlement. He could see people moving between buildings, carrying supplies to the underground shelters. Parents held their children close. As they hurried through the streets, everyone knew what was coming. The Zephyrians had chosen this colony precisely because it was so far from help. They had counted on no one coming to save these people. Down in the colony's medical center, Dr. Amy Foster was treating wounded soldiers from the failed defense attempt. Her hands moved quickly as she cleaned and bandaged burns from alien energy weapons. The small medical bay was full of injured people, and she knew things would get much worse when the real attack began. Dr. Foster called Nurse Betty Williams. From across the room, "We're running low on pain medication." Amy looked up from her patient. "Use what we have for the worst cases. Save the rest for when the bombing starts." She tried to keep her voice calm, but inside she felt sick thinking about what would happen to all these people in another part of the colony. Captain Ron Hayes gathered his 20 remaining soldiers. They were all that was left of the colonial defense force. Most were young men and women who had joined to protect mining equipment from space pirates. None of them had expected to face a real military invasion. "Listen up," Ron said to his small group. "We all know the situation. 30 alien warships against 20 soldiers. The odds are not good." He looked at each face in the room. "But these are our people, our families, our friends. We're going to make our stand here, and we're going to make it count." Private Sam Wilson raised his hand. "Captain, what about evacuation? Can't we get people off the planet?" Ron shook his head. "The aliens are blocking all space routes. No ships can get in or out. We're trapped here." He picked up his weapon and checked the power cell. "But that doesn't mean we give up." Back in the command center, Jake was reading reports from across the colony. Food supplies were running low. The power generators were damaged from the first attack. Worst of all, the children in the shelters were starting to panic. Some of the younger ones didn't understand why they couldn't go outside to play. Lisa suddenly looked up from her communication station. "Commander, I'm picking up something strange." "What is it?" "Long-range sensors are detecting unusual energy readings about 3 parsecs away. It could be ships, but the readings don't match any known human or alien signatures. Jake felt a tiny spark of hope, but he pushed it down. Keep monitoring, but don't get your hopes up. It's probably just solar activity. The hours passed slowly. Jake walked through the underground tunnels, checking on the civilian shelters. In one large room, 300 people sat on makeshift beds and waited. Children played quietly with toys, while their parents whispered to each other about what might happen next. An old miner named Pete Johnson approached Jake. "Commander, is anyone coming to help us?" Jake looked at the man's weathered face and saw the fear there. Pete had worked in the mines for 20 years. He had a wife and 3 grandchildren in this shelter. Jake wanted to lie and give him hope, but he had always been honest with his people. "I don't know, Pete. We've sent distress signals to every human base within range. But we're pretty far out here." Pete nodded slowly. "I figured as much. That's why they picked us, isn't it? Too far for help to come." "Maybe," Jake said, "but we're not giving up yet." As Jake continued his rounds, he thought about the people depending on him. The colony had been his responsibility for 5 years. He had watched families grow, celebrated births, mourned deaths. These weren't just names on a roster. They were. His people. The communication system crackled to life throughout the colony. It was the voice of Admiral Kex, the Zephyrian Fleet commander. His words were translated by the computer into human language. "Attention, human colonists. You have 4 hours remaining to surrender your mining operations and evacuate this world. If you refuse, we will begin destroying your settlement building by building. We suggest you use this time to say goodbye to your loved ones." The message ended, leaving only silence in the tunnels. Children began crying. Adults held each other tighter. Jake knew he had to do something to keep morale up. He activated the colony's internal communication system and spoke to all 50,000 people at once. "This is Commander Murphy. I know you're all scared. I'm scared too. But I want you to remember something. We are human beings. We don't abandon our home. We don't give up when things get hard. Right now, somewhere out there, someone is listening to our calls for help. Someone is coming." Jake paused, looking out at the alien ships in the sky. "I can't promise we'll all survive this, but I can promise that we'll face whatever comes together, as one people, as one family. And if no one else remembers us, at least we'll remember that we stood together when it mattered most." He turned off the communication system and walked back to the command center. Lisa was still at her station, still broadcasting their location to the empty space around them, still hoping someone would hear and come to help. Time was running out. 3 parsecs away from Kepler Colony, Captain Ben Carter sat in the command chair of the experimental warship Reckoning. The ship's metal walls hummed with dangerous energy as untested systems worked at their limits. Red warning lights blinked across every control panel, reminding the crew that their vessel was more likely to kill them than save anyone else. Ben had been listening to the distress calls from Kepler Colony for the past hour. Lisa Campbell's voice came through the speakers again and again, begging for help that everyone knew would never come. The colony was too far from any major human base. By the time regular military ships could reach them, the colonists would all be dead. "Captain," said Communications Officer Maria Santos from her station, "I'm still receiving their distress signals. They have less than 4 hours before the aliens attack." Ben stared at the tactical display showing the location of Kepler Colony. The Reckoning was the only human ship within range, but it was hardly a rescue vessel. It was an experimental prototype that military command had labeled too dangerous for normal use. The ship had been built to test new weapons and drive systems that pushed human technology beyond safe limits. Engineer Kelly Brooks walked onto the bridge, carrying a datapad full of technical reports. Her face was pale as she looked at the readings from the ship's experimental systems. She had been working on the Reckoning for 2 years, trying to make the dangerous technology stable enough for combat use. "Captain, I need to show you something," Kelly said, handing him the data pad. "These are the latest readings from our main systems." Ben looked at the numbers and frowned. "Explain this to me in simple terms, Kelly." "The gravitational pulse cannon has a 60% chance of overloading if we fire it at full power. The experimental armor plating might hold against alien weapons, or it might shatter like glass. We don't know because we've never tested it in real combat." Kelly paused and looked around the bridge. "And our faster-than-light drive has a 30% chance of tearing the ship apart every time we use it." Navigation Officer Steve Mitchell turned around in his chair. "Captain, I've been running calculations on the jump to Kepler Colony. We would need to make 3 consecutive hyperspace jumps through unstable space. The odds of all 3 jumps working correctly are not good." Ben stood up and walked to the main viewing screen. Outside, he could see the stars and the empty space. Between them, somewhere out there, 50,000 people were waiting to die because no one would come to help them. The Reckoning was their only chance, even if it was a terrible one. How long would it take us to reach them? Ben asked. Steve checked his instruments. "If all 3 jumps work, we could be there in 2 hours. If any of the jumps fail, we'll either be lost in hyperspace or blown to pieces." Weapons Officer Dan Phillips looked up from his control station. "Captain, even if we make it there in one piece, what can we do against 30 alien warships? We're one experimental ship with weapons that have never been tested in combat." Ben walked back to his command chair and sat down. He thought about the voice of Lisa Campbell calling for help across the empty space. He thought about Commander Jake Murphy trying to protect 50,000 civilians with 20 soldiers. He thought about children hiding in underground shelters, while alien ships prepared to destroy their homes. "Kelly, how many crew members do we have on board?" Ben asked. 40, sir. All volunteers who knew they were signing up for experimental duty. "And they all understand the risks?" Kelly nodded. "Everyone on this ship knows we're flying a prototype that could kill us at any moment. That's why we're here. No one else was crazy enough to crew this thing." Ben activated the ship's internal communication system and spoke to his crew. "Attention all hands. This is Captain Carter. I know you all signed up for experimental duty, but what I'm about to ask goes beyond our normal mission. There's a human colony under attack 3 parsecs from here. 50,000 civilians are going to die in the next few hours unless someone helps them." He paused and looked around the bridge at his officers. "We're the only ship close enough to reach them in time. But getting there means 3 dangerous hyperspace jumps in a ship that's barely holding together. Fighting means using weapons that have never been tested and could blow us up just as easily as the enemy. I won't order anyone to do this. It has to be a choice." The ship's communication system crackled as responses came in from all over the vessel. From the engine room, Chief Engineer Brooks heard her team volunteer to push the experimental drive beyond safe limits. In the weapons bay, Dan Phillips heard his crew offer to charge the untested cannon systems. Medical Officer Janet Price prepared the sick bay for casualties, while knowing she might not survive to treat anyone. One by one, all 40 crew members volunteered for what everyone knew was likely a suicide mission. They were engineers and soldiers, pilots and technicians, but they were all human beings who couldn't listen to 50,000 people die when they had a chance to help. "Maria, send a message to Kepler Colony," Ben ordered. "Tell them help is coming." "What should I say about our arrival time?" Ben looked at the navigation display showing their planned route through dangerous space. "Tell them to hold on for 2 more hours. Tell them someone heard their call." Kelly ran back to the engine room to prepare the experimental faster-than-light drive for emergency use. Steve began plotting their course through the unstable hyperspace regions. Dan started charging the gravitational pulse cannon, even though the weapon had never been fired at full power. Throughout the ship, 40 volunteers prepared for a mission that would either save 50,000 lives or kill them all trying. Reckoning was humanity's most dangerous experimental vessel, crewed by people crazy enough to risk everything for strangers they had never met. As alarms began sounding throughout the ship, Ben gave the order that would change everything. All hands, prepare for emergency hyperspace jump. We're going to show those aliens what happens when they think no one will come. The Reckoning's experimental drive powered up, distorting space around the ship as it prepared to leap across impossible distances toward a battle that would decide the fate of Kepler Colony. The Reckoning tore through space at impossible speeds, leaving a trail of twisted light behind it. Captain Ben Carter gripped his command chair as the ship shook violently during the third hyperspace jump. Sparks flew from control panels, while Chief Engineer Kelly Brooks shouted damage reports over the screening alarms. "Hull stress at 90%, Kelly called out from her station. "The experimental drive is holding, but barely. One more jump like that, and we'll come apart." Navigation Officer Steve Mitchell checked his instruments with shaking hands. "Jump complete, Captain. We're arriving at Kepler Colony now." The Reckoning dropped out of hyperspace directly above the besieged mining colony. The sudden appearance of the human ship caught everyone by surprise. On the planet below, Commander Jake Murphy stared at his tactical display in shock. One moment the sky had been filled only with alien warships. Now a single human vessel hung in space above them. "Is that really one of ours?" asked Lisa Campbell, hardly believing what she was seeing. Jake nodded slowly. "According to the ship's identification signal, it's the Reckoning. I've never heard of that vessel before." Above them in space, Admiral Kex of the Zephyrian fleet was equally surprised by the human ship's arrival. He studied the vessel on his tactical screens and laughed at what he saw. The ship was smaller than his flagship and appeared to be alone. One human vessel against his 30 warships. It was almost insulting. "Communications," Admiral Kex ordered. "Send a message to that human ship. Tell them to leave immediately or be destroyed with the colony." On the Reckoning's bridge, communications. Officer Maria Santos received the alien transmission and translated it for the crew. Captain Carter listened to the alien commander's threats and felt his anger rising. These aliens thought they could murder 50,000 innocent people, and no one would care enough to stop them. "Maria, open a channel to the entire Zephyrian." "Fleet," Ben ordered. "Channel open, sir." Ben's voice carried across space to every alien ship in the area. "This is Captain Carter of the Earthship Reckoning. You have 30 seconds to withdraw from human territory or face the consequences." Admiral Kex received the message and laughed even harder. The human captain was either insane or incredibly stupid. One ship against 30 was not a battle. It was target practice. "All fighters, attack that human vessel," Admiral Kex commanded. "Destroy it quickly so we can return to dealing with the colony." 12 Zephyrian fighter craft broke away from the main fleet and swarmed toward the Reckoning. Their plasma cannons began firing before they were even in good range, filling space with deadly energy beams. The alien pilots had fought many battles and destroyed many ships. They expected this fight to last only minutes. On the Reckoning, Weapons Officer Dan Phillips watched the enemy fighters approaching and felt sweat running down his face. "Captain, 12 fighters incoming. They'll be in weapons range in 30 seconds. "Kelly, how are our experimental shields holding?" Ben asked. Chief Engineer Brooks checked her readings. "Shield generators are online, but I don't know how much damage they can take. This is all untested technology, remember." The first wave of alien plasma bolts struck the Reckoning's experimental shields. The ship shuddered as energy cascaded across its hull, but the shields held. The alien pilots were surprised that their weapons had no immediate effect, but they continued their attack. "All power to shields," Ben ordered. "Then, wait until they're clustered together before firing." The Zephyrian fighters moved closer, concentrating their fire on what they assumed was a weak human vessel. They had no idea what kind of weapons the Reckoning carried. In all their battles against human colonies, they had only faced conventional energy weapons and missile systems. "Captain, they're in optimal firing range," Dan reported, his finger hovering over the gravitational pulse. "Cannon controls." Ben watched the tactical display as the 12 alien fighters formed a tight attack formation. They were trying to overwhelm his shields with concentrated firepower. It was exactly what he had hoped they would do. "Fire the gravitational pulse cannon at maximum power," Ben ordered. Dan pressed the firing controls and held his breath. The weapon had never been tested at full power. It might destroy the enemy fighters, or it might explode and take the Reckoning with it. The ship's entire frame groaned as massive amounts of energy flowed through systems that were never meant to handle such loads. The gravitational pulse erupted from the Reckoning and struck the center of the alien formation. Space itself seemed to ripple and bend around the weapon's impact point. The laws of physics twisted as artificial gravity fields crushed metal and bone with invisible force. 6 of the Zephyrian fighters were instantly flattened by gravity that increased to 1,000 times normal strength. Their sleek hulls crumpled like paper as the crews inside were crushed to death in seconds. 3 more fighters spun wildly out of control as gravity waves threw them in different directions. Only 3 fighters managed to escape the weapons. Effect: Admiral Kex watched in horror as half his fighter squadron was destroyed by a weapon he had never seen before. The human ship had somehow manipulated gravity itself as a weapon. In all his years of military service, he had never encountered technology that could do such things. "What kind of weapon was that?" demanded his tactical officer. "I don't know," Admiral Kex replied, staring at the wreckage floating in space. "But I want that human ship destroyed immediately. All vessels, concentrate fire on the enemy." On Kepler Colony, Commander Jake Murphy and his people watched the battle in amazement. The single human ship had just destroyed half a squadron of alien fighters with one shot. Dr. Amy Foster stopped treating her patients to stare at the tactical displays. Captain Ron Hayes gathered his remaining soldiers to watch as someone finally fought back against their attackers. "How is that possible?" Lisa Campbell asked, watching the alien wreckage drift past the colony. Jake shook his head in wonder. "I don't know what kind of ship that is, but it's like nothing I've ever seen before." Above them, the Reckoning prepared to face the full fury of the Zephyrian fleet. Captain Carter knew his ship couldn't survive against 30 warships, but he had already proven that humans would come to help when no one else would. Now he had to prove that sometimes the most dangerous ship in a battle was the one with nothing left to lose. Admiral Kex stared at the wreckage of his fighter squadron floating in space and felt something he had never experienced before: fear. In 30 years of military service, he had conquered dozens of worlds and destroyed hundreds of ships. But he had never seen a weapon that could crush metal with invisible force. "All capital ships, target that human vessel," Admiral Kex ordered. "Maximum firepower. I want it destroyed now." 25 Zephyrian warships turned their weapons toward the Reckoning. Plasma cannons, energy torpedoes, and particle beams all fired at once. Space lit up like a deadly fireworks display as enough firepower to level a city struck the experimental human ship. On the Reckoning's bridge, Captain Ben Carter felt his ship shake as the alien weapons hammered against their shields. Sparks flew from every control panel while Chief Engineer Kelly Brooks shouted damage reports over the screaming alarms. "Shields down to 40%, Kelly called out. Hull breaches on decks 3 and 5. The experimental armor is holding, but barely. How long can we take this kind of punishment? Ben asked. Kelly checked her instruments again. Maybe 2 minutes before the shields collapse completely. After that, we're dead. Weapons Officer Dan Phillips looked up from his station. Captain, the gravitational pulse cannon needs 3 minutes to recharge after that maximum power shot. We can't fire our main weapon again yet. Ben realized they were in serious trouble. His ship was being torn apart by alien weapons, and he couldn't fight back with full power. The reckoning had surprised the enemy once, but now they knew what they were facing. The aliens were coordinating their attack to overwhelm his defenses. Steve, can we use our experimental drive to get out of their weapons range? Ben asked Navigation Officer Mitchell. Steve shook his head. The drive systems are damaged from our hyperspace jumps. We can't make another jump for at least 10 minutes. Another wave of alien weapons fire struck the reckoning. The ship's lights flickered as power systems struggled to keep working. In the medical bay, Dr. Janet Price treated crew members who had been burned by exploding control panels. Throughout the ship, 40 volunteers prepared to die fighting against impossible odds. Then Steve Mitchell had an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. Captain, what if we don't try to escape? What if we use our damaged drive system as a weapon? Ben looked at his navigation officer with confusion. Explain that. The experimental faster-than-light drive creates gravitational distortions when it activates. What if we make very short hyperspace jumps directly into the middle of their formation? Each jump would create gravity waves that could damage their ships. Kelly Brooks understood what Steve was suggesting, and her face went pale. That's incredibly dangerous. Making microjumps with a damaged drive system could tear us apart. And appearing inside their formation means we'll be surrounded by enemy ships. We're already surrounded, Ben pointed out. And if we don't do something, in the next minute, we're going to be dead anyway. Dan Phillips looked up from his weapons console. Captain, if we're going to be in the middle of their formation, I could overcharge the gravitational pulse cannon beyond safety limits. Create localized gravity distortions that would be devastating at close range. What are the risks? Ben asked. The weapon could explode and destroy our ship, Dan replied honestly. But if it works, we could take several enemy vessels with us. Ben looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were all volunteers who had signed up for experimental duty, knowing they might die testing dangerous technology. Now they were offering to risk everything to save 50,000 people they had never met. Kelly, how many microjumps can our damaged drive handle? Maybe 3 or 4 before the system fails completely, Kelly answered. Then we make every jump count. Steve, plot a course that puts us in the center of their largest ship group. Dan, prepare to overcharge the gravitational cannon. Everyone else, hold on tight. The reckoning suddenly vanished from where it had been taking enemy fire and reappeared directly between 6 Zephyrian cruisers. The aliens were shocked to see the human ship materialize in their midst. The gravitational distortion from the microjump twisted the hulls of 2 alien vessels and sent debris flying in all directions. Before the enemy could react, Dan Phillips fired the overcharged gravitational pulse cannon. The weapon created a black hole that lasted only 3 seconds, but those 3 seconds were enough to tear apart everything within 1,000 meters. 2 Zephyrian cruisers were pulled into the artificial gravity well and crushed to nothing. Reckoning jumped again, appearing near another group of alien ships. This time, the microjump created gravity waves that sent 3 enemy vessels spinning out of control. Dan fired the cannon again, overcharging it even further. The weapon created gravity distortions that made space itself seem to bend and twist. Admiral Kex watched in horror as his carefully organized fleet fell into chaos. The human ship was using technology he couldn't understand, appearing and disappearing while creating weapons effects that defied everything he knew about warfare. Ships that had taken years to build were being destroyed in seconds by forces that seemed to break the laws of physics. How are they doing this? His tactical officer asked in panic. I don't know, Admiral Kex replied, watching another cruiser get crushed by artificial gravity. But we have to retreat. Signal all ships to withdraw immediately. On the third microjump, the Reckoning's experimental drive finally failed. Smoke poured from the engine room as Kelly Brooks struggled to prevent a reactor breach. The ship appeared near the alien flagship and stayed there, unable to jump again. Drive systems are down, Kelly reported. We're not going anywhere. Ben looked at the massive alien flagship on his viewing screen. It was 3 times the size of his ship and armed with enough weapons to destroy a small moon. But he still had 1 shot left with his gravitational pulse cannon. Dan, 1 more time. Maximum overcharge. Captain, if I push the weapon any harder, it will definitely explode and take us with it. Ben smiled grimly. Then we better make sure we take them with us too. The gravitational pulse cannon fired 1 final time, creating forces that no weapon was ever meant to produce. The artificial black hole that formed was larger and lasted longer than any before it. Admiral Kex's flagship was pulled into the gravity well and began to break apart as metal that had been forged in distant stars was compressed beyond the breaking point of matter itself. The artificial black hole collapsed after consuming Admiral Kex's flagship, leaving only twisted metal and the screams of dying aliens echoing across space. The remaining Zephyrian ships fled in terror, their commanders unable to understand how. 1 experimental human vessel had destroyed half their fleet using weapons that seemed to break reality itself. Captain Ben Carter sat in his command chair, watching the enemy ships retreat while his own vessel fell apart around him. Smoke filled the bridge as damaged systems sparked and failed. The Reckoning had won the battle, but the victory was killing the ship that had made it possible. Damage report. Ben called out to Chief Engineer Kelly Brooks. Kelly looked at her instruments with tears in her eyes. Captain, we're losing hull integrity on every deck. The reactor is overheating, and I can't stop it. The gravitational pulse cannon burned out completely when we fired that last shot. She paused and wiped smoke from her face. We have maybe 10 minutes before the whole ship comes apart. Navigation Officer Steve Mitchell turned around in his chair. Sir, I'm picking up emergency shuttles launching from Kepler Colony. They're coming to help us. Through the main viewing screen, Ben could see small rescue ships racing up from the planet below. The colonists were risking their own lives to save the crew that had saved them. It was exactly the kind of thing humans did for each other, even when it made no logical sense. Communications Officer Santos, contact those shuttles, Ben ordered. Tell them to stay back until we can evacuate our crew safely. Maria Santos tried to raise the rescue ships on the radio, but the Reckoning's communication systems were failing, along with everything else. Sparks flew from her control panel as she struggled to get a signal through the electromagnetic interference caused by their damaged reactor. Down on Kepler Colony, Commander Jake Murphy was coordinating the rescue effort from his command center. Every available shuttle and transport ship was being launched to save the crew of the experimental vessel that had appeared when no one else would come. How many people can we evacuate from that ship? Jake asked his logistics officer. Our shuttles can carry maybe 50 people total, sir. But we don't know how many crew members are aboard the Reckoning. Dr. Amy Foster was preparing the colony's medical center to receive wounded crew members from the battle. She had cleared every bed and gathered all available medical supplies. After what the human ship had done for them, she was determined to save as many of its crew as possible. On the Reckoning, Captain Carter made the hardest decision of his career. His ship was dying, but there might be enough time to save his crew if they acted quickly. He activated the ship's internal communication system for what he knew would be the last time. All hands, this is the captain. Abandon ship immediately. Report to the emergency shuttle bays for evacuation. This is not a drill. Throughout the ship, 40 volunteers who had risked everything to save strangers began the process of saving themselves. Chief Engineer Brooks took one last look at the experimental systems she had spent 2 years developing, then sealed the engine room and headed for the evacuation points. Weapons. Officer Dan Phillips powered down the destroyed gravitational pulse cannon and grabbed the technical specifications. If humanity was going to build more ships like the Reckoning, they would need to know how the weapon systems worked. Medical Officer Janet Price helped wounded crew members reach the shuttle bays while the ship shook apart around them. The first rescue shuttle from Kepler Colony docked with the Reckoning just as the ship's hull began to crack open in several places. Pilot Sarah Johnson had volunteered for the dangerous mission even though her own shuttle might be destroyed if the human warship exploded. "How many people are we taking?" Sarah asked as crew members began boarding her shuttle. 40 total, replied Chief Brooks. "We're the entire crew." Sarah was amazed that such a small group had defeated an entire alien fleet, but there was no time to ask questions. The Reckoning was coming apart, and they needed to evacuate everyone before the reactor exploded. One by one, the rescue shuttles carried the crew of the experimental warship to safety. Captain Carter was the last person to leave his ship, following the ancient tradition that the captain goes down with his vessel or is the last to abandon it. As his shuttle pulled away from the Reckoning, Ben watched his ship die in space. The experimental warship that had been too dangerous for regular military use exploded in a burst of light that could be seen from the surface of Kepler Colony. The reactor breach created a brief star in space, marking the end of humanity's most dangerous prototype vessel. Down on the colony, the rescued crew members were treated as heroes. Commander Murphy personally thanked Captain Carter, while Dr. Foster treated the wounded crew members alongside. Medical Officer Price. The colonists opened their homes to the 40 volunteers who had saved 50,000 lives. Word of the battle spread quickly through human space and beyond. The story of one experimental ship arriving when no one else would come became legend throughout the galaxy. Other alien civilizations heard about the humans who would rather risk mutual destruction than abandon their own people. The Zephyrian Empire officially withdrew from all human territory and issued a formal apology for the attack on Kepler Colony. They had learned that humans were not the peaceful, helpless species they appeared to be. They were people who built ships so dangerous they could destroy themselves, all for the chance to protect strangers. Years later, a new class of human warships was built using the technical data recovered from the Reckoning. The ships were called the Carter class, named after the captain who had proven that sometimes the most dangerous ship in the galaxy was the one crewed by people with nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Children throughout human space learned about the Battle of Kepler Colony in their history classes. They learned about 40 volunteers who flew an experimental ship across impossible distances to save people they had never met. They learned that being human meant never abandoning your own, no matter what the cost. And when other alien species whispered about humanity in the darkness between stars, they always remembered the day that someone came when they thought no one would.